Hello, Fahd. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, that's great. So now we are going to start this session on DevOps and Security for .NET Core. I would like to thank you all for joining this session. So before starting this session, I would like to request you all to mention your names and emails in the comment section so that we can, after the event, we can send you your certificates. And also, if you have any questions during the session, you can ask in the Q&A section in the right side of your screen, and all your questions will be answered. So from now moving on, I would like to request Sir Afzaal Ahmad to enlighten us with his words. So Sir Afzaal, can you join us?
Thank you, Saad. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me, those who have already joined. And I'd like to thank in advance everyone who will be joining me after this time. The area that we will be covering today will be DevOps and security for .NET Core. I'd just like to outline a couple of things before we get started. First of all, we would like to share that this event is for students. So do expect some beginner-only terminologies when I'm talking throughout the event. So there won't be much of like technical details as I go, but you can always send questions as Saad has already mentioned, and I will try my best to share my thoughts on them. Saad, would you please allow me to share my screen now?
Yes, you can share your screen.
Sure thing. Cool. So I think we should wait for a minute or two so that everyone join.
Yes,
And
you
then
can.
until then, I will just outline a couple of more details. The agenda that we have today was basically for DevOps and security. It's not necessary if you are a .NET Core developer or not. It doesn't really matter because most of the practices in the DevOps or security or automation happen in all other domains and runtimes as well. So if you are using PHP, Node, or if you're not even a developer, if you are an IT admin, or if you just belong to, let's say, customer support, all these topics that we will discuss today will be applied to you as well. The primary reason why this is happening is that most of the organizations are moving toward a cloud-first approach of software development, delivery, and maintenance. So it doesn't really matter if you are a developer or if you are just an IT manager or an ops guy. You are responsible for the overall solution that you are building. Most of the teams for the students who are just joining the industry now, I'd hate to break it to you. People will expect a lot from you. So unless you definitely know all these things, it's going to be difficult for you to manage and like to stay relevant in the industry. I am a senior software engineer. I am working in cloud environments primarily. My focus is on Azure and Alibaba Cloud. I also do some AWS work by night with some clients that I have. I just did a webinar a couple of weeks ago that was about how serverless is changing the deployment options for your applications. And even in that talk, I talked about how students, not just students, but the starters in the industry should focus more on how they can, let's say, how they can improve the overall solution that they are building. And that will be the main theme of this presentation that I will have. And I will show you how you can or why you should secure your applications. And by security, what normally we mean when we are talking about, let's say, DevSecOps or DevOps Sec in the later parts of this presentation. So the agenda for this talk is we will first talk about who developers are, what operations is what developer operations is, which some people refer to as DevOps, and how we are moving beyond what DevOps had already laid its foundation with. And we will discuss a couple of things that you as beginners or students or experts require to know, and how they differ from your agile methodologies or different approaches that you might take in software development. Then we will talk a little bit about .NET Core. Most of you, if you don't know .NET Core or if you're not a .NET Core developer, that's also fine. But it's good to know that .NET Core is, how to put it, like it's your silver bullet to rule all the deployment options you can build your applications in. And we will cover teeny tiny details about .NET Core platforms and how security changes on all of these platforms as you deep dive into different platforms of delivery. We will also take a look at the variants of DevSecOps and how it differs from normal DevOps. So that will be a core theme for at least a while. So you should pay more focus on when we are talking about the security edition and security considerations for the DevOps teams. We will take a quick look at the security, the meaning of security, what it means, and why you should care about it. Then by the end of the talk, we will have a couple of open source packages, software, and some additional tools that you can use to enforce these security and compliance policies on your software, how you can maintain or apply the policies on everyone inside your organization to, let's say, to write the code that follows a standard instead of everybody writing in their own way. So we will talk about those, and you will also learn for students, especially if you are a student, I will share a couple of useful tools and some offerings from industry leading experts and giants that you can use in your regular day development. Or if you are building your FYP, you can get some help from organizations such as cloud vendors, some IDEs and platforms that you can use for your personal development and so on. Now, before we begin the talk, I would like to recommend actually that you all ask questions. Like Saad has already mentioned, it would be a session we will have at least 10 minutes by the end of this session where we will be talking about your questions. If you are a student, please do put your questions through. I would love to answer them. I would love to talk about how you think about this talk, or how you think about, or what you think about the DevSecOps, the DevOps, security, why you think it matters, or why you think it does not matter at all. Like, for example, if you think you are just a student and you are just building an FYP, why you think you don't need to care about security, or why you think that DevOps or DevSecOps is just for the enterprises that have, say, 50 to 60 people working on a software. And we can discuss it in a positive way, and maybe I will learn something from you guys as well. So first thing that we need to see is the talk focuses on the DevOps. DevOps basically is a buzzword. I'll have to admit it, that DevOps is just a buzzword, nothing more than that. People have been doing DevOps for over a decade now, or even more than that. The DevOps tends to help you out with automation of your tasks. The things that you have to manually perform, DevOps tends to do that automatically. So for example, if we take a look at what continuous integration is, because that is what DevOps at the end of the day boils down to. So if we see continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, they all boil down to the basic automation that you perform based on something that happens inside your repository. So continuous integration happens when you commit something. Okay, so you have made a change in a project and you just want to make sure that it works. It doesn't break anything. For a single developer or for students especially, it doesn't really matter, because you know the changes that you are making and you're not breaking anything. All the code, all the project, the entire solution actually is built up inside your brain, and Any change that you make in one component, you know how it is going to be reflected in a different component. But as you grow, say as you are trying to build a solution which is interdepartmental. So for example, if you are having a computer science project which requires some contributions from, let's say, the stats department. So for example, you're building a data science project. Now you need to make sure that all the changes that you are making are not conflicting with those of the changes that are being made by the physics department. And same applies to them. So I think this will be a good example that we will be using throughout this talk. So what happens is so you need to enforce that whenever you are making a change, the repository does not break. Same applies to physics, same applies to the dean and everyone. And that is the goal of DevOps, to quickly fail if it has to fail, instead of like failing by the end of the day when the entire team has done all of their work, like they have spent 8 hours of their day working on something that is going to break ultimately by the end. So that automation and the speed was the actual goal of DevOps, because most of the other things were already solved by agile methodologies and other approaches that were taken by the start of 2000 Y2K. So that is the primary thing. But once you see, there has always been a gap between, not just now that we have bridged the gap between departments or the silos, there is a gap between the approaches. There is a gap between the processes that are automated. So now we have continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, but there is a gap between all of these. And the problem is that the gap, which sometimes comes as the security or the compliance or the legals, is always thrown. Like for example, if you have a developer, the developer will be saying, why do I need to care about if the software has this quality, or if the software works in the European market and not in the US market? So you see, if now we have a couple of regulations and the compliance compliance regulations in Europe, the GDPR, or in the US, the Californian Act. So the developers normally would say, we don't care. We don't care about that. It's not our job. Same will be from the legals. If the legal says that I'm not responsible for, say, the audit part, we need to have a third-party auditor or something. So we have this gap that needs to be bridged, and that is where a new buzzword comes in, which is the security part for the solution. And as we see, the security is not about your software only. The security is more about the security for your solution, for your company, and for your customer. So this security bit tends to cover up the entire ecosystem that you are trying to build. For .NET Core, we basically have solutions that are deployed not only on just consoles or desktops, which is definitely the days of, say, .NET Framework. Back then, I was a student when we were focusing on, let's say, WPF or Windows Forms. During those days, what we had to do was, we knew that our solution is only going to be executed on a Windows platform. So we don't need to care about most of the protocols or the standards that work in, let's say, Linux or Mac environment. Or most of the solutions were not even cloud native. Back then, we did not have the luxury of cloud as you guys have today. And we also did not have any support for mobile development. For mobile, we needed to have Android native development kit. We needed to have Xcode, or we needed to have, let's say, Apache Cordova. I'm not sure if any of you uses that. But the point that I'm trying to make over here is that the same code that you write with .NET Core is no longer available or no longer limited by the platform. The same code can run and execute and would run on, let's say, Linux environment or Mac environment. So this change brings in a couple of complexities when you are building the software, when you are developing, deploying the software, and when you are managing the software. So now you need to see how each platform interacts with the .NET Core and vice versa, and what complexities are being brought into your software by those platforms. So for example, Linux is an open source software, Linux kernel. You can basically use any of the solution from .NET Core and host it on a Linux virtual machine. It should run, but the problem that it will create is that if, let's say, your Linux machine can be hijacked, so can be your .NET Core environment. And I'm not sure if this should be spoken for the students, but the thing is that now you also need to take care of the license applications. So although this is all the .NET Core is MIT licensed, but most of the applications or open source will not be MIT licensed. So now you also need to take care of how or which of the platforms can you actually target. So all of these considerations were not answered by DevOps, because the DevOps part is it doesn't take the license, audit, compliance, and all of these parts into consideration, because DevOps, as the name suggests, it's only about the developers and the operations. This is where the security part comes in. Now, before we actually talk about how this works, let's take a look at how the naming works. When we were talking about the DevOps, what happened in the initials was we had devs and the ops. Now, by convention, we knew that each time you would develop a solution, you would just build it and test it and then send it over to the ops. Sometimes the ops will be the ones who will be testing. So the test phase would be the bridge, or it would be something that would be joining the developers and the ops part. There are some other details, like, for example, the ops would be sharing the reports for how the solution is working, and the devs would be more focused on how we are hosting the solution. But those are some extra details that we don't need to care about. The things that we need to care about is how devs and ops were working. So there was a sequence: devs first, then the ops part. With DevSecOps or DevOps Sec, what happens is that now the Sec part actually introduces how you develop the solution. If you call it Sec DevOps, what happens is that although all these three variants don't mean anything if you are doing it properly and your organization is happy with how you are performing with the development and how you are answering the questions to your customer emails. But if we take a deeper look into what this name actually means, the first one means that you are taking a look at the security practices before you are diving into the development and operation cycle. This is normally a research focused approach to the development and the operational side for your software. And this is normally recommended in small scale industries, where you need to make sure that whatever you are going to do, it should work. Like, there should be like 90% chance that you will pass or succeed with your development or with your project at the end. Then there is this DevSecOps, which is a practice of introduction of security methods. Now, I don't want to confuse you with the security. We have a different slide where I will be talking about the security bits and what security actually means. For the time being, just bear with me and take a look at just the security part and think that security just means the security for your project. So in DevSecOps, the security means that you add the security throughout the DevOps, like when you are writing the code, when you are building the code, when you are testing the code, and when you are hosting the code. So there are all of these phases, and you add security bits to every single one of them, and you test them in different phases. So for example, during the building phase, you can verify if someone has written the code that conforms to the standards of the organization. So in .NET Core, if we talk about that, we basically can enforce if somebody is following the correct braces or where the brackets come, or if somebody is using correct naming standards, if somebody is using proper accessibilities like public, private, protected, etc. So we can enforce those. Then during the build phases, we can verify if the build passes or fails. And during the same build, we can see, okay, if there are any warnings, if there are any errors. that we need to take care of. And what sort of warnings is our code providing us? Are those policy related warnings? Are those security related warnings? And we will see in the later parts of this demonstration how we can use different tools that can help us with this kind of approach. Similarly, during this phase, we can also test if the code, if the environment where we will be hosting our software, that environment is secure. Although we have written a secure code, but if the environment has backdoors or it can be hacked easily, our secure code will not be able to perform efficiently. One of the example of this is, let's imagine that you are building a web application. You have written a very static application which only has a home page, and you have a very secure application at the back end which runs and it protects everything that you have. But if your front end does not have, let's say, an HTTPS, the SSL certificate installed, anyone can modify the code for your front end and they can send your customers to a malicious website. So all the security that you have applied on the back end of your infrastructure, that doesn't even matter, because there is some place, or I mean, it doesn't matter how small the area of attack is. If the area of attack exists, your entire solution can be compromised. So these are the practices that are added to every single phase inside your DevOps cycle. Then we have DevOps Sec environment. Now, based on the report, you create a web firewall on a cloud platform, say Azure or Alibaba Cloud or any other. So these are the practices that are added to every single phase inside your DevOps cycle. Then we have DevOps Sec. What this means is that once you are finished with the development or the operational side, now you need to verify if the software that you have built is or should be approved to be released to the public, normally before a release. So this helps your developers to focus on writing the software and then, let's say, patching it up before deploying it. This approach is helpful when you do not want to change your code base, or if your code base is legacy. So you do not want to focus on like rewriting the entire application stack or changing the software itself for the runtimes. What you do in this approach is you focus more on the web firewalls. So using the web firewalls, what you do is you build the application, then you review it, then you scan for any vulnerabilities within the application once it is executing on let's say a sandbox environment. Now, based on the report, you create a web firewall on a cloud platform, say Azure or Alibaba Cloud or any other, and then you create a firewall. And based on that firewall, you apply some rules and policies that prevent users from access. Like for example, if you have a SQL injection, so you can prevent, like, okay, so although I'm using a REST API, so if from that REST API the query contains an injection, right? So now you know that your web application contains that, but changing or modifying that code will be expensive. So what you can do is you can apply that code inside the web firewall, and that is how you can protect the application. So now the application or the DevOps cycle is no longer just about building and deploying it. It's about continuously maintaining it, continuously receiving the feedback about your application, continuously improving it so that the solution is secure. And now your customers are also a part of your life cycle because they are the ones who are providing you the live feedback. Similarly, your organization and the name of the organization is also a part of this life cycle, because if something bad happens, it's the name of your organization that is going to be questioned the first. And since there are many students who are like coming up with their own startup ideas, and luckily it's a time in Pakistan when we are receiving a lot of support for the startups. So I think it's a good time for students actually to learn why it actually matters to include somebody from the legals or some auditors or some compliance experts who can help you better deploy your solution, not just develop, but also to deploy your solution. So you should know which regulations apply to your solution and why you should care about them. Now I also talked about why you should care about the security. When we talk about DevSecOps, and I have to share my own opinion on those three variants. I personally like DevSecOps because normally it's just about the security that each team should focus on. Although DevSecOps or DevOps tries to bring everyone together in a single room, but at the end of the day, an ops guy will be an ops guy, a developer will be a developer, and someone with the legal credentials will always be from the team of the legals. So that is where the DevSecOps helps us because we can introduce as much security as we need when we need it. So for example, if you need the security in the testing, you can just add the DevSecOps and all the plugins and packages inside the DevSecOps part and leave everything else as it is. And then you can test and grow as you are needing. So the security part expands on not just the security bit, but also on the automation. So now you need to improve the velocity with which you deploy your solution, with which you release your solution, and with which you improve on the feedback that is received by your, let's say, analytics solution or the customers or the testers as well. We also have audit. It's the most important and terrifying element for any software that is being deployed nowadays because of GDPR and a couple of other regulations that now the focus is more on how you are telling your customer or the users about your software than it is whether your software works or not. Like if your software doesn't work, nobody's going to care about that. But if your software is not compliant with the regulations, at least you are going to know that you made a mistake. Like Google learned about it, Microsoft and other leading organizations, they learned about it. We have been watching a couple of videos about Mark and other people when they did not comply with the regulations. And we also had scanning. The scanning bit is more about the infrastructure level scanning. So for example, if you are building your software, where exactly are you building it? If you are building it on, let's say, GitHub or GitLab, the virtual machines that are actually being used to scan your or to build your code, are they secure? What exactly is their status? Or if they do get hacked, how can you know that? What vulnerabilities are there? And so on. So you can, and you should also scan the infrastructure where you are deploying your code. There are a couple of scanners for Kubernetes or Docker or native virtual machines on Azure, AWS, Alibaba Cloud, and all other platforms. Then security is not just about once the code has been built or once the code has been deployed. The security part also entails the code reviews, like for example, how you can enforce a standard on the coding. So then the organization comes up with a plan like, okay, so this is how we are going to name our variables. This is how we are going to give the name for the packages, the path, etc. But definitely after a year or 2 years, somebody comes in and they bring their own ideas and they think, okay, so I'm an expert. I will go ahead and I will just add something of my own. And they mess up the whole entire repository because now your repository more likely knows one way of writing the code, but somebody comes in and they add their own contributions in a way. So what you can do is you can enforce some of the policies on the code repository. So before somebody attempts to make a change, the repository will reject these changes. So that is one of the ways in which you can secure your code repository for for the betterment of the tools. Then, as we already discussed, there are a couple of other areas where you need to add the security or where the security changes. One of the examples that I think about is, uh, let's say the Xamarin applications. Now the Xamarin applications are available on the devices for your customers and they are offline, right? And that always scares me thinking, what if somebody writes code that actually packages the API keys or the connection strings for the databases and then they ship it to the online store. What happens now is that although it decreases the complexity of your solution, so for example, if you are using a connection string or an API key for a face recognition API or any API, right? So you add it inside your Android code, you package it, and then all you do is you just ship it to the Play Store. What happens is that your average customer, average John Doe, he can download the application and he can continue to use it. That's okay. But who knows, like 1 out of 1,000 customers, he would just go ahead, like plug your APK into a Kali Linux or any other operating system, and he will just like reverse engineer your application and he can extract that API key. Now, what if he does that with all of your applications? In a nutshell, he will be in control of all of the resources that you are using. Worst case scenario is that he ends up using your resources and that is going to charge you. In normal cases, that is what will happen. You will be able to take a look at like, okay, so the resources are being used in a bad manner and so on. So this is the way in which you will be charged. But what if somebody goes on and they modify your let's say AdSense key? I have in my past have had an experience of an organization where they were providing a live streaming service for African, Middle Eastern, and other countries. What happened was that the organization uh, recently came to know about a scenario where they were not earning anything. Although their infrastructure was showing that they were receiving a lot of customers, they were receiving a lot of users, but were not earning anything. So they thought maybe it's about the overall pay rate of the AdSense during those days. After like a couple of months, they realized that it was actually not AdSense, not the user, but actually it was one of their engineers who had modified the key for their AdSense account, and he had used his own AdSense account in that. Now, definitely, AdSense will not be showing them any reports because AdSense is not using their key at all, right? So these are the things that can be controlled. Like, for example, if you have a code standard or code review, you can check if the code is exactly the way you want it to be, right? So these are a couple of things that security provides you with. And if you are a student and you are building up your own startup, so you need to take a look at how you can enforce these rules on your repository, and then you can grant access to your external contributors and they can come in and they can communicate with you, they can contribute to your application, they can contribute to your source code and all, and you cannot even worry about it. I remember back in my day, people were so like, they had no trust in developers. They wouldn't even share the source code back then because open source was not even a buzzword back then. Very little people knew about open source, and even little people wanted to share their source code. So what they did was they would ask you to write something, have it like emailed to them, and they would like try to insert it into their own project and then run it. If it doesn't work, they will just share the error with you. Now with DevOps, with DevSecOps, with open source, what you can do is you can share your code. That doesn't matter anymore. Like anybody can get a copy of any sample, right? For Xamarin, for machine learning projects, like there are deep learning projects openly available on GitHub. You can use data Kaggle and build your own, let's say, facial recognition system in under 15 minutes, right? So it doesn't really matter what code it is. What matters is how that code is organized, how that code tries to or attempts to help your customers, how that code attempts to like help the developers' lives, like how easy it is to work on a software. Recently, I had a client who requested me to work on one of the Xamarin projects, and although he had some of the very old libraries like OpenCV, etc. But the scariest part for me was that he did not have a version control system. Like, how would I know which of the changes am I responsible for and which of the changes somebody else made, and I'm not the one to be blamed for, right? So these are the things that you need to learn before you actually enter the software industry, because they will help you a lot. Even if your vendor does not have a version control system applied, if they don't have a DevOps tool, right? So GitHub and GitLab, these are the two DevOps tools. I call them the DevOps tools because they provide you with everything that you need for DevOps. They are no longer just a version control system or a code sharing repository. They are more than that, and they are continuously evolving. And you can involve other teams such as the compliance or the legals. So, and they can also help you out with protection as you grow and as you scale across the markets. Now, the couple of tools that I wanted to mention were one of the most interesting tools that I have used in the past is Codacy. What Codacy does is that it performs all of these reviews on your code. You can connect it with your GitHub account, and the GitHub account the repositories from the GitHub account can be pulled, and you can be provided with the reviews. Like if you have some security flaws, if you have some standard issues, if you have some policy issues, Codacy will tell you with all them, and you can solve them, and Codacy will maintain a report of how many issues were there initially, how many you solved, how many are introduced afterwards, and so on and so forth. And based on your own requirements, you can configure which of these policies you need and which of the policies are not for you. Then for JavaScript, we have npm audit. npm is basically the largest package manager for the JavaScript ecosystem, especially for Node.js. npm audit helps you with the JavaScript code, and not just JavaScript code, but the packages that are available on npm. So you can get some help with that over from npm as you are downloading them. SonarLint is basically a VS Code extension for Node.js and JavaScript. I have it installed on my VS Code, and it helps me with real-time analysis of the code as I am using it in my Node.js applications. So that helps me understand, okay, so these are the bits that I need to look into, or if like I can just change the version and decrease the vulnerabilities. Then there are some Roslyn analyzers that you can use for your C# code. They can help you with some policies, but like I mentioned, the Codacy tool can help you out with that just fine, and it's free for the open source projects. I'll now go and share the Codacy tool with you guys, so you will know like what exactly it is that I'm trying to talk about. Let me know if you guys can see me clearly, or should I zoom it up a bit. So here are just a couple of repositories that I have created on GitHub, and all that I needed to do to have them imported over here was that I just connected my GitHub account, and I just went over here and added a repository. So when you are creating your own account, you can, like for example, if you have an FYP, you can add the code over here and maybe get some extra credits for sharing how you improved the code, how you secured the code, or how like you were able to add some compliance to your repositories. So if I open up one of the projects, like for example, this was just a hello world application where I'm just trying to, like, let's say, get the basic calculation for 2 and 2 and the result. The interesting bit that you will see over here is that Codacy arranges and organizes different elements from your code. So if you see over here, you see that in the program.cs file, it tells a couple of details. Like it says you can use the protected constructor or static keyword to the class declaration. The reason being, there is no instance variable. So it says that you can use the static initialization of your program for performance purposes. Then you can also see that it also says remove this logging statement. Now, although for most people, the logging statement is the only way that they can debug the solution. But as you move toward a cloud native approach, you learn that the console.write line is not the recommended approach, and you should try to avoid it, because although this line doesn't have any problem, just imagine if you just logged in a password, right? Your developer was just testing out a solution, and what he did was that he entered that I'm using, let's say, username admin, and password was abcd@1234, and he just tested it and it worked, and he committed the code into the production, right? What happens is that each time a user will try to log in, those username and passwords will be logged as well. So these are the practices that you need to remove from your code. What you can do is, if you have to log these details, you can use some third-party tools, some third-party analytics solutions, such as Google provides those, Google Analytics. Microsoft Azure has those, the Azure Analytics Insights, and so on. So you can use those tools. What happens with those is that only the people who are, or who should be able to review your logs or review the application performance would be able to see it. The people who have access to, let's say, your virtual machine or your cloud environments, they should not be able to see the logs at all. Secondly, it is much difficult to enforce policies on the logs of your resources, because you are actually losing what is happening with your resources on the cloud. But these kind of logs about when something was happening, or when a user took some action on your application. Let's say if you are building an e-commerce website and you want to learn what are the trends of your users for the past 6 months and how different people were engaging with the application, which products were being selected more. You need to store all of those logs inside some sort of a database or a data warehouse. These logs should only be stored for, like, let's say 7 days or 30 days, because they are expensive and they are useless. Just like something says your virtual machine started at 12 a.m. or 1 a.m. That doesn't mean any sense until or unless you are trying to debug something, and you will be able to debug something in a day or two, right? So these kind of resources should go. So that is one of the reasons why Codacy is suggesting you to change this. And if you go to the dashboard for this repository, you will see what I was talking about. It tells us that there were some issues with the repository. How many issues have you fixed? How many issues there exactly are? And as you can see, there are some code style compatibility issues, some performance issues. If I go over to the ASP.NET one, this is the ASP.NET issue. Now you can see that definitely ASP.NET is a broader platform, so it has some more issues. There are some 7 security issues, 8 error prone issues, some coding style issues. So these are different type of issues that Codacy can help you, and you can definitely filter them out. If you head over to the security part, based on your requirements, you can configure what exactly you want to get and what you want to ignore. So if I see over here, so this is a command injection. What it says is that graphic tabs, some file access, and insecure storage access. What it is asking us to do is, it is asking us to enable all of these searches, and then based on these scans, Codacy will help us understand how our repository is functioning and what further problems there are with our repository. Now I will go back to the presentation again to wrap things up, because we're almost out of time. So I also wrote a book about DevSecOps for .NET Core, where I talk a little bit more about what security should mean for your .NET Core applications. I talk a little bit more about the mobile application security, the database security, how you should secure your databases, especially in cloud native environment, how you should apply or work out the license management, because if your license is not supportive for your solution, you will get into trouble, and how different softwares can help you out with the license management for your application and the repository, especially if you are working in open source environment, how you should be able to see like whether or not a particular package or a solution is helpful in your environment based on its license. For students, most of you might already know that GitHub is offering a lot of benefits for the students. And it's not just GitHub, it's actually every online platform, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, Alibaba Cloud, AWS, they all offer a lot of benefits to the students. All that you need to use is your student email ID, and based on that, they will be offering you with learning support, some vouchers for certifications, some resources such as DigitalOcean provides you with some online cloud credits that you can use to build your own labs, maybe host your own solutions. Azure, for example, can be used to host your final year projects. Most of the times that's a requirement, especially in Imagine Cup if you are participating. Good luck. So you should also try to register for GitHub for students and receive all the perks and benefits that are available to you while you are a student. So this was my talk. I hope I helped you understand a couple of the changes that are being applied in the software industry and why you should care as a student, and why you should care if you have an excellent topic for the next startup that is going to revolutionize a lot of industries, not just computer science. So now I'll be taking your questions and we'll be having some open talk.
Thank you, Afzaal, for this wonderful session. So we have a couple of questions right now. So the first question is, how DevOps security different from AWS cloud security?
Well, DevOps security is just a general term. AWS cloud security is more about securing the cloud and specifically about AWS. Azure has their own security dashboard. AWS has their own security dashboard. And like I mentioned, in DevSecOps, we have different tools for each of the phase. The AWS cloud security more likely comes into the continuous delivery and continuous deployment phases, where you are securing the production environment or the testing or staging environments. It doesn't normally tell you about whether your code is correct or whether the code that you are writing conforms to the standards or the policies of your organization. So DevSecOps tends to help you with all of the different areas for your software development and the lifecycle. AWS and Azure and Alibaba and all other ones, they tend to provide you a software or a solution that is more strictly tied to their own platform. So that is the difference.
Okay, great. And other question is, does Codacy have any local deployment type option?
No, that is not what I was able to see. They offer, what happens is that they might support the GitHub offline deployment, but they use online one. I did have mentioned the Roslyn analyzers, and I did say that Codacy and Roslyn analyzers, they both do the same thing. Now the difference is that Codacy is online one, but the Roslyn analyzers can be used using Nugget package manager. So you can, if you want to use something offline and you want to use something just like what Codacy does, and for .NET Core, so you can use Roslyn analyzer from Nugget.
Okay, great. Another question is, what is the most important thing DevOps help us achieve?
Automation and the speed. Like I mentioned, it like for example, if you have to perform some reviews, it will help you get the review done in under a minute or something. It also helps your code reviewers understand what part should they focus more on, what is the area that is different, or what requires their attention. Similarly, it also helps your operations team like know if based on some tests and such as regression tests, if something has changed, if the performance has downgraded, or if like somebody else has to come in and they have to review the code before it is applied to the repository. So it helps with the automation of the life cycle, and it helps with the speed with which you can reach the market.
Another question is, does DevOps use to secure connections or cloud?
I'm sorry, I don't get the question. Can you repeat it?
Does DevOps use to secure connections or cloud?
Cloud is more of an infrastructure. The DevOps is automation. The DevSecOps is for reviews. So when I'm talking about securing on the cloud, DevOps can do that. Like if your solution is not secure, it should not be deployed at all. But when we talk about connection strings or others, we need to have some reviews. Like we need to see what sort of code there is in the repository. So that is where DevSecOps comes in and it helps. So both applies. Yeah.
Uh, so we have a question. Can you give detail about web firewall? Is it related to reverse proxy?
No, reverse proxy is more of a concept when, yeah, you can say a reverse proxy, but reverse proxy can be used in that example when I talked about, okay, so we have a front end that forwards the customers to a backend service. The web firewall that I was talking about is more of a concept that comes in front of everything. Like if you have your application hosted on Microsoft Azure, for example, but you don't want to change it. So what you do is you use Azure resources and Azure's web firewall, let's say, and you build in some rules. So whenever the customer is trying to connect to your application, the request first comes through the web firewall. Based on the web firewall, it might drop the request or modify it. Now reverse proxy do work in the same approach, but that's more of like connection. Like it's more of a proxy. Web firewall is more about go no go approach. Like should this because in web firewall the request can go in as it is if it doesn't fall into one of the malicious requests. But with reverse proxy, we might need to rewrite a couple of areas of the request, such as the domain name or request headers, etc. So they do differ in somewhat areas.
Uh, we have a question. Is my application or microservice leaking data?
Leaking data. That depends on a lot of areas. You can, I think I'll let Mark Zuckerberg answer these questions for you. You can watch the how his Senate questions went, and you can see, okay, so whether your application is leaking some data or if the leak is expected, because normally sometimes if you are building an API, let's say, it might be expected that you allow your customers to know some of the data, but I think that's more of a broader question. Maybe the OP can ask me this question by being some specific, like what sort of application they are having and what sort of data leak are they talking about.
Okay, great. So I think that's it for all the questions. If you have any questions more, you can ask, or otherwise we are going to wrap up the session. So
Yeah.
thank you. So thank you, Afzaal, for this wonderful session. If anyone wants to ask any more questions regarding DevOps, they can surely connect Afzaal Ahmad on Twitter and also social handles. So thank you everyone for joining this session, and I'm going to wrap up this session, and you will all receive certificates in about a week. If you didn't receive your certificate, kindly contact us with the email we have provided. And thank you everyone for joining this session, and Sir Afzaal for enlightening with his
Thanks for
wonderful
having me.
words.
Thanks for having me.
So thank you everyone.